Hey art nerds, you guys asked for it. Today we've got a little bit of art supply redemption for the Paul Rubens half pans, and we're also taking a look at the Paul Rubens pocket palette. I am really excited to check this one out, and I'm really excited to share it with you guys today. There, art nerds, I asked you guys what you wanted to see next in the student grade showdown, and the jeweled Paul Rubens mini palette won by a landslide. But to be able to talk about this palette, I need to first give the original half pan palette some art supply redemption. So today's review is going to be a twofer. First, we're going to take a look at the Paul Rubens half pans, and then we're going to take a look at the Paul Rubens jeweled travel palette. So those of you who have been hanging out with me for a really long time probably remember that years ago I reviewed the Paul Rubens 24-piece half pan set. I'd purchased that set from Wish, and frankly, I've got some suspicions that it might have been a dupe. You see, I received the Paul Rubens two-bin set for Christmas one year, and I fell in love with these watercolors. I really like how they handle, and I've had the pleasure of trying out various other Paul Rubens two-bins. Once you start saying it, you can't stop saying it. I've had the pleasure of trying out other Paul Rubens products since, particularly a variety of their papers. So since my original half pan review, I have reviewed and field tested the Paul Rubens two-bins. I've also tested their round, sparkly, and regular watercolor paper, and I've even tested their student grade Mei Liang Pigments palette. And I'm gonna have some clips from the original half pan set, the Paul Rubens two-bins, and the Mei Liang pigments here, so that we can talk about them in a little bit more detail and I can give you guys a little bit more context. So this is the original Paul Rubens unbox and swatch from several years ago. These were ordered from Wish, along with a set of Pabio watercolors that I disliked even more. They had a really strong smell to them, and back then I was still swatching on Fluid's cellulose watercolor paper since I paint my comics on Canson Montval watercolor paper. You know, cellulose with cellulose, so I tried to keep it kind of similar. And I just really wasn't that impressed with these. They activated okay, but they were just really lacking something, or maybe I wasn't in the right headspace, or maybe how I reviewed watercolors wasn't right. I don't know, but at the time, I just wasn't impressed with these watercolors. The field test was done on cotton rag postcards that at the time I was using for all my field tests, and I just felt like these were kind of chalky and they just didn't handle the way I really wanted them to. Looking back at it, I'm like, I can kind of see where I was coming from, but I can also see where some problems arose, and it really wouldn't have surprised me if that was actually a knockoff, because looking at some of the colors now, especially those oranges, I'm a little bit like, maybe so. So I was really impressed and surprised with how much I really enjoyed the Paul Rubens tube watercolors. I'm swatching it on their cotton rag watercolor paper because I figured that would be the fairest test to test their paints out on their paper. This was a gift set that I received as a Christmas present, so it also came with the palette, and I was just really impressed with how these paints handled the beautiful vibrant colors, the granulation, the quick activation, the misty color effects I was able to get when I did the wet into wet test. It just really impressed me. Now, by this point in time, I had changed several things about how I unboxed and swatched watercolors, but I also know for a fact that this was the real deal set, so that could also be part of it. And here's the field test for the Paul Rubens tubins. This is where they really shone. I was painting on Stonehenge Aqua watercolor paper, and I mean, I did a lot of painting. I did a lot of layers, I did a lot of wet into wet, I did a lot of color mixing, and I was just so impressed with how these paints handled. They were a lot of fun to use, and I was able to get some really beautiful colors. I like these so much better than the half pans that I reviewed a while back, but part of that is due to the color selection. The color selection I felt in this 24 color set was just really way more up my alley than the 24 half pan set. They also reactivate when they've dried in a ceramic palette really easily, so no complaints. If you're looking for good affordable tube watercolors, please check out my reviews for the Paul Rubens tubins because I really like them and I think you guys will like them too. And here's some footage from the Mei Liang Pigment Unbox and Swatch. This is Paul Rubens' student grade lineup. I like the color selection in this. This is a 36 color palette. There's some granulation to some of the colors. There's different amounts of liftability to some of the colors. Just in general, I felt like this was a really good student grade set, and it really changed my mind and my opinion on what student grade watercolors could be. I wasn't exactly comparing them to professional grade since they are just student grade, but they held up way better than I thought they would, and the price point was really reasonable, making it very easy to recommend it to my students or to other people who want to play with watercolors but don't want to invest a whole lot of money. Here's the wet into wet test from that. You can see we were able to get like 3 layers of color, so we can really develop some beautiful misty effects, and these handled way better than I thought they should. They punched way above their pay grade. And here is the field test for the Mei Liang pigments. This was also done on Stonehenge Aqua cotton rag paper. That's what I used for the majority of my field test at this point in time. And I was really impressed by the effects and techniques I was able to use with these, because often with student grade watercolors, they really don't handle like professional grade. Like there's a lot you can't do with student grade watercolors, which in my opinion makes them not so great for learning. But these held up to everything I threw at them, from mixing skin tones to wet into wet blending to really soft color transition to optical blending with different colors. These were just really great. I enjoyed painting with them, and everything I asked them to do, they were able to do. This is a really good palette. It's one that I can recommend quite comfortably to people who are a little interested in watercolor but don't necessarily want to pay a whole lot for watercolor, or occasional watercolor users. And it's one that I recommend to my students. So if you're looking for a good budget watercolor palette, I hope you'll check out my reviews for Mei Liang pigments. So generally, ever since that original Paul Rubens review, I've been really impressed by the quality that I've seen from Paul Rubens. And honestly, that was enough for me to give them the benefit of the doubt and figure that perhaps that original set that I reviewed, purchased from Wish, might have been a knockoff, because that does happen on Wish from time to time. So this set was purchased from the Paul Rubens store on Amazon, and it should not be a knockoff. This should be the real deal. So you can get your own for $39.70 on Amazon, and there are 24 half pans in this pink metal tin. And according to the listing, because I always like going by what the company says about themselves because it gives us a baseline for things we can hold them to later. Advantages of this 24-piece watercolor paint set: ultra pure pigments that won't easily become muddy when mixed, high transparency, strong tinting, excellent light fast ratings. These top quality paints will make your artwork stay vivid for a very long time. We use extra fine gum arabic to create these professional grade watercolors, which produce paints that are easy to mix, light fast, and permanent. We also offer a selection of truly unique colors. Professional extra fine gum arabic based watercolors with unsurpassed purity and permanence. Every batch made is tested and analyzed. Bright colors, good transparency, high saturation, smooth drawing. Each watercolor pan can be removed or replaced individually, so you can arrange your colors to your own preference. Our lightweight pink tin is as beautiful as it is functional and very convenient to carry on the go. This set contains a mixing palette inside the lid, which can be easily washed. It is the best friend of travelers, artists, and amateur hobbyists. And I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again. I am honestly a fan of the adorable pink palettes. I love when art supplies are cute and functional. So I'm in favor of the pretty pink palettes myself. But if you don't like them, you could take your half pans and put them in another palette. There's a variety of very cheap metal palettes on the market. Paul Rubens has other palettes other than the pink palette available. They've got some beautiful jewel-like palettes and some black palettes and some white palettes as well. Those are harder to find, though not impossible to find on Amazon. They're easier to find on AliExpress. But I wanted to totally remove any doubt that this is a Paul Rubens product. Yes, I could have ordered from the Paul Rubens store on AliExpress. That is an option. But I decided to go with Amazon because that way I can leave a review. So our packaging came shrink wrapped. It also has the Amazon information sticker, Paul Rubens watercolor paint set, professional art paint set with 24 vibrant colors, made in China. It was applied upside down. The box also says artist transparent watercolor, fine artist watercolors. We've got Paul Rubens here and nothing else on the back. So let's go ahead and rip into this box. I can't quite say this is the pinkest set I've ever reviewed because I think I reviewed this once before, but it is a very pink set. So if you don't like pink at all, this might not be a good fit for you, but it is very pink and very cute in my opinion. So we have a cleaning cloth, which I still don't really know why they include those. It's a microfiber cloth, so it's not even an absorbent cloth. I'm kind of confused. And inside we have some paperwork. We also have, awesome, a swatch card. Ooh, you know, is this end up being, no, okay, I was like, I hope this is not the glitter set because I'm not looking to review the glitter set today. Sometimes things get mixed up, but no, this is the correct set. It just looked a little glittery. So in my Etcher review, I said that I thought the Etcher watercolors might be the Paul Rubens watercolors, and then I kind of second guessed myself. Now I'm looking at it and I'm still kind of like, maybe it is. So anyway, I couldn't find pigment info online. I didn't dig too hard. There's pigment info here on the swatch card, so I will make sure I have that down in the description for you guys. I know YouTube videos are not easy to search, so I will probably also update the Amazon listing with this just to try to be helpful. And we have some work for Google Translate. But here at the top, it says Shanghai Aylwin Painting Materials Co. Limited. And I think I also have a yellow student grade palette from them that you guys wanted me to review as part of the student grade showdown. So it'll be really fun to be able to compare all. I'm particularly looking forward to comparing that against the Meliang pigment, since I think of that as student grade. So it'll be interesting to see how those are different. And then we also have a brochure. So in the brochure, looks like color numbers, color names, pigment info for what looks like their full range. That's pretty awesome. Well, when I say their full range, I'm not seeing like the granulating colors that I'm currently working on reviewing. This looks like the same from the first time I reviewed this. Oh, you know what? We are here for Art Supply Redemption, and I rehomed that set a long time ago. So maybe I will feel differently. Maybe I'll feel more positively. Maybe that was just a bad batch. So I was really hoping that in the original review, I had already gone ahead and translated everything, and I don't think I did. So that means I need to do that for you guys now. Otherwise, I would have just pointed you in that direction. But I'm gonna fire up the old Google Translate, and we sure will have fun with some weird mistranslations. So I'm going to read to you guys what Google Translate has given me. I'm really appreciative to Google Translate, as much as I make fun of it, because I would have no access to this whatsoever if it weren't for Google Translate. So what I'm making fun of is the Google Translate translation. I'm not actually making fun of Chinese, Mandarin, or Cantonese. I cannot speak or read any of that. So if it weren't for Google Translate, I would not be able to do a lot of this. So I do genuinely appreciate it, but we do get some really wild translations sometimes. But I appreciate that it makes art supplies from around the world a lot more accessible. So we're gonna start with the included swatch card, and I can't actually tell you which segment is which, so I apologize for that. So Loomis Panel Ribbons Artist Grade Watercolor Paint, Rubens Watercolor Paint, has a total of 115 colors, of which 76 colors all use a single color powder. In order to meet different painting habits, our watercolors are available in two types: solid and tubular. Colloidal selection, made of transparent and water-soluble gum arabic in southern Sahara. The compatibility of each color powder has been tested many times so that the pigment can achieve good results when used. Powder selections: Zenban's watercolor paint. I will never choose Lange's toners, but only use toners with high durability, such as purple, and never use PV1 and PV3 as PV14, because the price of PV1 and PV3 is 1/50th of PV114. Never use PW6, PB29, and PB15 to formulate as PB28 cobalt blue, because its price is also 1/5 different. So you will find the use, effect, and color of Rubens watercolor paint is not the same as the world famous brand Up and Down. Grinding and filling. Each color of Rubens watercolor paint is ground for many times, and it takes 2 months to fully integrate the toner and then grind again for many times, so as to ensure that the color can reach a good degree of fineness. The solid watercolor paint adopts multiple filling processes so that each filling can be completely dried. High purity toner. Rubens watercolor paint is only produced with high purity toner and does not add any fillers to change the color. The properties of powder, so Rubens watercolor paint is suitable for both dry and wet painting methods without graying and color change. So unfortunately, right now, we can't necessarily trust everything that art supply companies are telling us, which is a shame, because it'd make life so much easier if we could. But basically, if we can trust them, they're saying they're not going to sub for cheaper powders just because cheaper pigments just because those pigments are cheaper. They're going to go with what is the best use for that color. They also say that for these half pans, they fill them and allow them to dry multiple times so that you get a really nice solid fill. I have used their tubular watercolor paint, and I really like it. I continue to use it. I think it is, I really enjoy it. I think it's an excellent paint. That said, I am a watercolor comic artist, so I paint illustrations, mostly with the idea of reproduction, painting like postcards, painting things like prints, so I'm not necessarily doing light fast testing on these, but many other people here on YouTube have. So if you want a second opinion other than the companies on light fast information, I highly recommend that you check out some of the other reviews. Okay, so then on to the back. Shanghai Aylwin Painting Materials Co. Limited. Shanghai Aylwin Painting Materials Co. Limited is a professional company focusing on providing high-quality painting materials and related knowledge for artists and learning artists. It is a comprehensive professional art painting materials supplier integrating research and development, production and sales, paints Brooks, Belgium paints, Swiss professional art paint... Swiss Cata, Swiss pencils, Fabriano, Italian paper, Behe, Spain, and other world-renowned art brands are agents in China. While cooperating with world-renowned art material dealers, the company has learned the historical knowledge of many painting and... Sorry, with this much text, it's easy for me to lose myself. Of many painting materials, and finally chose the long-established books for technical cooperation, inheriting the specifications of materials and making Chinese people's own good pigments. At the same time, Aowen painting paper, silk painting book, Zenbensi, I apologize for the mispronunciation, artist grade paint, Meliang paint, and other brands cover the selection from children's painting enlightenment to professional painting. Rubens oil paints and watercolors have been highly recognized by many well-known domestic artists. In 2011, it was awarded the only cooperative brand of materials and restoration studio technology of China Academy of Oil Painting, China National Academy of Arts. Rubens Pigments cooperated with Brooks in terms of research and development, material selection, material use, and production. At the same time, all indicators must pass the Materials of China Oil Painting Academy. It can only be put on the market after strict inspection and supervision of Restoration Studio. Rubens Pigment is a brand that Chinese artists use with confidence. This kind of card uses Rubens 200 fine grain classic Sin watercolor people, fresh style. So if any of my viewers are in China or are familiar with the Chinese art supply market, let me know how this brand is regarded in China. Is it so, like here in the US, right? Cotman would be considered a student grade brand. Reeves would be even lower than that. And Winsor & Newton would be considered a professional grade brand. So let me know how well regarded Paul Rubens paints are in China. I like them, but I'd love to hear how people, where it comes from, feel about the brand. So then we have the brochure. So I'm just going to read this part here. Sri Lanka Chengdo uses a single package called Dahao and produces two kinds of products, including cattle company and two kinds of packaging, national cattle and tubular hanging. This is the best time to travel to the southern region of Hara. The good ones are made by Las Hidi, and each color powder is tested several times so that the color can reach 00 kinds of commercial colors in watercolor and materials when used, of which 76 kinds of colors should be used for the good luck of the beans. Neutral has produced two kinds of products, including cattle and not including cattle. Two kinds of packaging methods, acoustic body and tubular, are selected, and the most suitable gum arabic for bright light suspension is produced in the region of Kailananji for each color. After many times of compatibility, the material can be used to achieve the effect. The selection, I think, and I'm going to have this linked not in the description below, but there's like a link to my full show notes in the description below, and this is going to be in the Google Doc that links, just because I have a limited amount of space to type on YouTube. I think this is mostly just a repetition of the front of this, except translated even worse, and I have no idea why Google Translate did a worse job with this. Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. So this side here, CA location. This year, the watercolor department only uses the selected colors and produces without any fillers to modify the experiment. So this is a water-based dry painting method. It will not be Mutual Harmony that produces some beauty. Shengji uses many processes to make it in one Wangxi period. In order to make the product completely full, I think this is also just a repetition of this for the most part. No cost to use or Nina domestic watercolor. Color meters, solid watercolor, small color, iron, and gold to install. Iron box total. Color iron. So usually when they're talking about iron boxes, they just mean these kind of tins here. And usually when they're referring to toner, that's pigment. Like I said, Google Translate is a trip. And they want to, oh my goodness. Okay. Full set of 48 wooden box set, national body watercolor with cattle, want to juice. Body watercolor, large color iron should be set. 24 iron will be set to send color wooden. See, this is why I hate doing the Google Translate with you guys, because often there's information here that we can't easily find online. So it's a wonderful resource to learn more about the product and learn more about the company. And it's only accessible to me through Google Translate. The downside is Google Translate frequently gives me garbage, like all this about cattle and wanting to juice. So I think that's enough of this. I was laughing so much that it was hard for me to read. I kept losing my place. So I think what I'm going to do is we're going to unbox these, and I kind of looked through my original review, and this is looking a lot like that original review. But you know what? I'm a different painter now. I handle my paints differently. I review my paints differently. So this is art supply redemption as much for myself as it is for Paul Rubens. So what I'm going to do is I am going to swatch on their paper, and I'm also going to swatch on my standard Blick Studio watercolor blocks. And the reason I'm not swatching on Paul Rubens paper is just because I swatch everything on the Blick Studio blocks these days. So it's a really nice kind of baseline standard. And then when we finish, so we're going to swatch it. We're also going to do are we going to do a mud test? Yeah, we're going to do a mud test with this. And then we'll check out the pearly, pearlescent, beautiful jeweled compact that I showed you guys at the beginning of the video. So obviously we have 24 little beauties in this tin. It's a pretty standard watercolor tin with a removable watercolor tray. And there's room for another row of paints or room for a brush if you so desire. This looks a little bit worse for wear. On the side, it says Shanghai Aowen Art Materials Co. Limited. There's a barcode for individual sale. On the front, it has the color number, the color name, and this is probably the color name again. And then on this side, it has the pigment information. This is probably light fast information. So for today's review, what I'm going to do is obviously I'm going to record the pigment names and pigment numbers and pigment information. Unfortunately, I am not going to transcribe the light fastness information in this one. So I like to save, I think these are the sticky ones, because I remember, or I saw in my initial review that I was cutting off the labels and then sticking it on the back. So it looks like they have custom half pans too, which are pretty nice. So I'm going to do just that. I am going to cut the label and pop it on the side and the back so that I have that for later reference. I'm also going to go grab my Etcher paints so we can compare them really quick. So here is our Etcher box. I've already shared the unboxing swatch for this palette here on the channel so you guys can check it out, but I haven't done the field test for it yet. Here is our Paul Rubens box. But boxes are easy to replace. So inside of the Etcher box is a cleaning cloth. Maybe it feels a little nicer than the Paul Rubens one, but it could just be the black dye maybe is a little thicker than the pink dye. And then it comes, that sticker just kills me. They couldn't spring to get it screened like Paul Rubens has. Okay, so they're clearly not covering up the Paul Rubens logo. This isn't big enough to cover that up. And the tin itself is different. This looks like a Meeden tin. So inside, they have more rounded tops, but they had the same adhesive. Oh, they are in there. They have the same adhesive kind of wrapper that, not literally the same, but the same style of wrapper that the Paul Rubens had. So I'm going to unwrap these and we'll see if there's any visual similarities. And if you're wondering why it matters if the Etcher paints are just the Paul Rubens rebranded, the Paul Rubens are typically about $10 cheaper than the Etcher paints. $5 to $10. I think that Etcher palette was $45. I think this was about $40. So it's really a matter of just buying it from the source and you can get a little bit cheaper. But no one's going to be admitting to anything. It's not like Etcher's going to be like, yeah, we were white labeling the Paul Rubens paints. So all I can really give you guys is an educated guess. There's nothing I can say that's definitive. Even just unwrapping one, I can already tell you guys I really don't think it's the same paint, because these actually look like they were poured and then dried rather than the dome kind of striated top that we get with extruded watercolors. So I personally do prefer poured and dried. I usually work with watercolor from tubes that have been dried in half pan, so I'm already kind of used to that anyway. I find that extruded watercolors just tend to be a lot drier than poured watercolors, and they take longer to activate. So for my preference, I prefer poured and then dried. And then that also kind of lines up with what they actually claimed about their product. A lot of the watercolors that I've reviewed as part of the Student Grade Showdown claim to be poured, but they're very clearly extruded watercolors, and they just take much longer to activate than the poured watercolors. Something else interesting is that the top part that actually touches the paint doesn't seem to have any adhesive on it, which is great because you're not polluting the paint with adhesive, but it means I gotta go dig up my double stick tape so I can get these to really stick to the half pans. Most of these are clean and smooth and perfect, but this one has some dust or something that got kind of stuck to it. That shouldn't be a long-term problem. That should probably come off the first time I swatch it, but I just wanted to point it out to you guys because that could be a quality control issue. So next, we are gonna start out by swatching on their included paper, and I'll go over the color names in this set as well as the pigment information. And I always have to harp on the amount of waste. This one has been really pretty good. We have the shrink wrap packaging that it came in, and that could have come from Amazon, and this is it for the wrappers. I could reuse basically everything else, so good job, Paul Rubens. The colors in this set are A233 Permanent Lemon Yellow, which uses PY3, D243 Cadmium Yellow Medium, which uses PY35, B252 Indian Yellow, which uses PY83, D216 Cadmium Red Light, which uses PR108, B222 Scarlet, which uses PR123, B220 Madder Red, which uses PR177, C313 Violet, which uses PV19, D115 Permanent Violet, which uses PV23, E290 Cobalt Blue, which uses PB28, B193 France Ultramarine, which uses PB29, E304 Sky Blue, which uses PB36, A308 Sea Blue, which uses PB15 to a ratio of 3, A297 Prussian Blue, which uses PB27, A296 Payne's Gray, which uses PB15, PB29, and PBK9, A168 Yellow Green, which uses PG36 and PY74, A175 Tree Green, which uses PG7, PY3, PR101, and PW4, C183 Hooker's Green Brilliant, which uses PG17, A160 Emerald Green Deep, which uses PG7, A234 Yellow Ochre, which uses PY42, B318 Pazuli Red Ochre, which uses PR101, A334 Umber, which uses PR101 and PBR7, A333 burnt sienna, which uses PB7, A336 burned brown, which uses PBR7, and A340 coal black, which uses PBK7. And I'm going to have all of that listed down in the description below for you guys, as well as additional show notes. Now, swatching on their paper does not include the color names, only the color numbers. I spritzed them with watercolor first, and I started to see some areas lighten up. This can sometimes point to the inclusion of optical brighteners or extenders, but it's not an end-all be-all sort of situation. The paints have a tendency to glob up and coat the brush. They're a bit more opaque than I really expected. You're going to want to work with a palette for color control. They're quick to activate, and they may not need any pre-activation at all. I've got a problem that I just can't understand, and it would probably require me letting these dry and pulling out some of the last few to double check the names and the color numbers and the pigments, because for the first row everything lines up 1 to 1. For the second row though, I'm off by 1, and as I'm looking at the pigment info, I shouldn't be off by 1. These should both be 12. So how did I miss one of the browns and have to include it here? I don't know. I don't know. But I did, and that's annoying because this isn't like my own swatch sheet that I could erase and re-pencil and fix. This is their swatch sheet. So yeah, that's fun. Good job, Beck. But anyway, what's kind of more important for me, for the most part, because this doesn't even include the color names. Anyway, it's the color number and the pigment info. So what I'm going to really rely on when I need to rely on it is the swatches that I'm going to do myself on the Blick Studio paper. But I do not know how that happened. Maybe you guys saw me mess up and are just like screaming at the computer screen or the phone screen. I don't know. But I was kind of disappointed by how thin this paper is, and it's not the worst I've swatched on, but it's not as receptive as you'd expect from a company that also produces pretty good watercolor paper. So it's a little bit like, okay, that's a choice. And you guys probably also noticed that the paints had a tendency to glob up and coat the brush, and they were more opaque than I really expected for professional grade watercolors. Generally, you want to see a variety of opacities, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we're swatching on the Blick paper. And you're going to want to work with a palette, like a ceramic palette, for color control because of how much it globs up on your brush. They're quick to activate, so they might not need pre-activation either. I might just be handling them a little bit wrong. So now that my swatch sheet has dried, we can move on to the real test, to the real swatches. I'm going to be swatching today on Blick Studio Cotton Rag watercolor paper, the block bound. So basically the same paper I use for all of my unbox and swatches. And we're going to be looking for several different things. We're going to be looking at opacity. We're going to be looking at granulation. We're going to be looking at how the colors kind of wash out. And we're also going to be looking at liftability. Once we've finished with our swatches, we're going to move on to the mud test. You guys have noticed that, or that's become a new thing since the Student Grade Showdown, but it is a great test to see where potential problems might lie. And that started with the Mia unbox and swatch and field test. I got so burnt with that I decided I needed to add another level of testing to my reviews so that when I'm doing the field test, I know what I'm dealing with. And I am not going to be doing any light fastness testing, like I said earlier, but there are lots of other YouTubers who do indeed set up light fast testing, so more power to them. So if you guys are new here and you're unfamiliar with what I do on the channel, I am a comic artist. So I'm a watercolor comic artist, and that is the lens that I view watercolor with. That's why I love watercolor into paint, is for my watercolor comics, 7-inch Cara. You guys can check it out for free as a webcomic at 7inchcara.com. So my concerns for painting are a little bit different from many other watercolor artists. We just have different needs, and I think that's really cool, and I think that's really valid. I also do a lot of watercolor illustration. I share a lot of those tutorials here on the channel, and I am an art educator. So I am always on the lookout for art supplies that work well for comics, art supplies that work well for illustration, or art supplies that'll work well for my students. Those are the 3 categories that I care the most about. And at the end of my unboxing swatches, I generally try to say who I think a product might be for, especially if it's not really for me or not really suitable for watercolor comics. So I hope you guys will stick around. I hope you guys enjoy what I do here. And if you're looking for more watercolor reviews from the lens of a watercolor illustrator and comic artist, I've got you covered. I'll have some great playlists down in the description below. So here is our paper. It's block bound, so buckling and kipping should not be a problem. And I've got a ruler and a Copic marker here. Now I have noticed that some watercolors, especially cheap watercolors, cause a weird reaction with these markers. So really this is just a test for opacity. So I'm leaving space for a mass tone swatch at the top. Nice bold black line. And then we'll do another down here and I'll give it a few minutes to dry. We're also going to do some color mixing. I don't know how I forgot to mention that, but I think that's pretty important. All right, there are our lines. Next come our swatches. The paints had a chance to dry out a little bit, so I didn't reconstitute them. And I noticed that they handle a lot better this way. So you really don't need to pre-activate these paints when you're using them. They're already fairly moist. On cotton rag paper, the colors go down pretty saturated, but seem to be drying much lighter. In the course of a couple of moves, I've lost, or let's be real, thrown away a lot of my older watercolor swatches. So I don't actually know where my original Paul Rubens Tubin swatches are. So I thought it would be kind of nice, it'd be definitely helpful for you guys watching if I went ahead and I re-swatched my Tubins. Now, it was the 24-piece gift set. It came with a palette, and it's been refilled a few times using those same colors. I am going to pre-activate it mostly because I have found from past experience that these do actually benefit from a little bit of pre-activation. Otherwise, everything is going to be the same. I mean, this is a different pad, a Blick Studio paper, but it's still Blick Studio paper. I have my black Copic lines there so we can test for opacity. I'm going to be using the same brush, and I'm still going to be using filtered water. And since I threw away my swatches for the Tubins when I moved, I went ahead and re-swatched them for you guys. So I have a better basis of comparison for how they handle. It's nice and fresh in my mind. And B, so you guys can actually see the colors and see how they handle. Since we're comparing half pans to tubes, I thought it'd be pretty helpful for you guys to be able to see this in real time under the same lighting conditions that I reviewed the half pans. Here are our half pan swatches, and then here are my fresh new from the tube swatches. So I'm gonna try to find a way where I can show both of these on camera at the same time because they're both kind of big and they both take up a lot of desk space. So swatching the 24 color tube palette, I realized these are actually two different color palettes. They've got some very different colors, although there are some basics that are the same. So the tube palette is more of a floral palette. There's more pinks and greens, fewer blues. It includes a white, which the half pan palette does not include, but it does not have a Payne's gray, unlike the half pan palette, which has really, this is more like an indigo than a Payne's gray in my opinion. And there are several intentionally opaque colors in the tube set. I feel like the saturation on this palette, this being the tube set, is quite a bit better than on the half pan palette. And as of right now, you know, having fully tested the tube palette and doing an art supply redemption on the half pan palette, I feel like I still greatly prefer the tube palette. I like how the colors handle, I like the color payoff, and I like the color selection. Next in our series of tests is a little bit of color mixing, and I actually still have some room on the bottom of the paper, so I thought I would make use of that. So basically what I'm going to be doing is using some primary colors to mix some secondary colors. Then I'm going to go with some popular mixes, like mixing Payne's gray, for example, and then if there's still room left, I might try to make for some fun mixes. So for color mixing, I'm doing two different kinds. I'm going to go ahead and set up my optical mixing grid first so that way it has a chance to dry while I'm doing my atomic mixing. So we've got our cool yellow, our warm yellow, our cool yellow, our cool red, our warm red, our cool blue, our warm blue. I'm going to give those a chance to dry while I do some color mixing. And I am doing this with the same colors that I just used for the optical mixes. So we're going for like a couple of cool mixed yellow oranges, a couple of warm mixed oranges. Generally what I do is I just mix, I do like 6 different mixes, I guess. So I'll mix the cool yellow with the warm red with the cool red. I'll mix the warm yellow with the cool red with the warm red, and just kind of work my way through there. And this gives me kind of an idea for like muddiness, how well the colors mix, how well we can get some nice secondary mixes, because even though this is a fairly large palette and we have a lot of colors, it's not all inclusive, and I'm always going to want to be able to mix some of my own colors. So with atomic mixing, the colors are easy to mix and the mixed colors are beautiful and often have interesting granulation, which is something I'm always looking for. The colors did dry a bit desaturated, but not egregiously so. And that's not uncommon with watercolor, that the color is going to dry lighter and a bit desaturated. They're so beautiful and jewel-like while they're wet though. If only we could keep them this way. And I was able to mix some really nice purples, which is often the mark of a good watercolor. I have mixed so many ugly, nasty purples with cheap watercolors before. And then for our optical mixes, the colors did reactivate when a glaze was applied, but I probably didn't allow it to dry long enough. Glazing seems to be possible, and the colors aren't so opaque that they obscure optical blending. The color mixing tests proved pretty promising, although not totally conclusive. When we are doing atomic mixing, or we're smashing our two colors together, we do get some interesting and fairly saturated blends. I didn't really have difficulty mixing any colors. With our optical mixing, where we glaze one layer on top of another, I think I just didn't give it enough time to fully dry out. It is Southeast Louisiana. It can be pretty humid. It's probably pretty humid right now, in fact. And even though I have my dehumidifier running, maybe I was being a little bit impatient. I'm willing to give the reactability the benefit of the doubt, and we'll see if that's an issue, you know, further on down the line. But I think next it's time for us to do the lift test. So much like with the swatches, we're really looking for our colors to react differently because they're all made up of different pigments. So some should be more lifting than others, some should be more staining than others. And I think it's already pretty promising because we do have a mix of granulating colors along with more finely milled colors. So this is pretty promising that these paints are I don't want to say using the pigments that they say they use. It would be wonderful, wonderful, wonderful if we could 100% trust art supply companies to always be honest with us, but I don't know. Some of them are starting to make me kind of wonder. But saying that, believing that Paul Rubens is actually true to their word, this is already kind of checking out. This is already kind of in line for what we would expect to see. So for the lift test, I'm just going to use a flat watercolor brush, do a little bit of scrubbing, not too much, dab it with a clean paper towel, and see how much comes up and how much remains on the paper. So most of the colors are pretty staining, which is, you do want to see different degrees of liftability because different pigments would have different lifting properties. I may not have applied them thickly enough. Maybe if I had done it on the mass tone swatch, we would have seen more variation. It's not, based on what I saw from these watercolors, I'm not concerned about this, but it does make me consider doing a field test, even though I use Paul Rubens watercolors a lot, just in case there's some hidden properties that we need to know about before I can recommend these watercolors wholeheartedly. So most of the colors, at least applied this way, are fairly staining. There's a little bit of liftability, not as much as I had thought. That is interesting, but it doesn't really mean anything one way or the other. None of these tests in and of themselves are like definitive anything tests. They're just kind of indicators that are going to show me, what I could expect when I'm doing the field test, what I can expect when I'm actually painting with these, and what maybe you guys can expect when you're painting with these. So I have one more test for this particular palette, and then we can move on to the adorable Jeweled Little palette. We are going to do a mud test. So basically, or a wet into wet test is another word that I have for it. I'm going to use yet more Blick cotton rag watercolor paper. We're going to throw a lot of water and a lot of color at it, and we're going to see how the colors kind of intermingle and intermix and granulate, and basically how they handle when you throw water at them. And that's a great test for people who, like me, like to do watercolor washes, like to work with watercolor really thinly, or like to do a lot of beautiful wet into wet techniques. And you guys might have noticed that we are using a fair amount of pretty expensive, not that this is the most expensive, but cotton rag paper ain't cheap no matter how you slice it. We're using a fair amount of cotton rag paper to test these paints out. And if you like what I do, if you want to help support the work that I'm doing here on the channel, a great way you can do that is by joining me over on Patreon at patreon.com/nattosoup. All of the funds that we raise together go right back into the channel to make it an even better place. So everything that I review here, that's all purchased, or pretty much all. I always disclose when a company sends me something, but that's really like 3% of everything that I've reviewed here on the channel ever. So everything is pretty much purchased out of pocket using funds I earn from teaching and funds from Patreon. So if you like what I do and you want to help me continue to do it, Patreon is a great way to get early access to videos, to get adorable coloring line arts that you can print out yourself, and to get access to my class materials. So it's very win-win. But if you can't afford to join me over on Patreon, if you're planning on doing a little bit of shopping, if you would use my Amazon affiliate links when you're buying art supplies, that doesn't cost you any extra. So you're still getting art supplies, you're still paying the same price, but I see a little bounty from Amazon every time somebody uses one of my affiliate links. So that is another great way to support the work I do here. And then finally, the totally for freezy way to support what I do is to simply click subscribe and hit the bell notification and actually watch my videos when I update. Leave a like and maybe leave a comment. That's a great way to encourage me to continue doing what I do. So for this test, it's pretty simple and straightforward. We've got clean water. I'm gonna go grab a large watercolor quill, and we're just gonna cover this in water and cover this in pigments and see what happens. So with the mud test, the colors go down really saturated and diffuse beautifully onto the paper. It's really similar to how the tubes handle. The colors gently intermix while wet, so you can get some really lovely soft blends. Granulation becomes apparent as it dries, and it adds a nice atmospheric effect. While I really like the tubes and probably prefer them, I think I unfairly wrote off the half pans years ago. Now the colors do dry a lot less saturated, but that's to be expected considering how much water I threw in there. I'm seeing a little bit of like white speckles from optical brighteners, but it's really only in the light, bright, opaque green, and I mean really, who's surprised there? Otherwise, there's no halos or other strangeness. These blend wet into wet quite well and have passed my wet into wet test. So as you guys noticed, the colors went down really saturated and diffused beautifully onto the paper, really similar to how the tubes handled a while back. The colors gently intermix while wet, so you can get some really soft, lovely blends, like especially over here in this area. Granulation becomes apparent as it dries, adding a nice atmospheric effect. While I really like the tubes and probably prefer them, I think I unfairly wrote these off years ago. The colors dry a lot less saturated, but that's to be expected considering how much water I threw in there too. I'm seeing a little bit of like white speckles from optical brighteners, but it's really only in this light, bright, opaque green. And I mean, really, who's surprised there? Otherwise, there's no halos or weirdness that we've seen with some of the student grade options in the student grade showdown. These blend wet into wet quite well, and they have passed my wet into wet test. So the real question at the top of my mind is, are these better than the Mei-Liang pigments? Because both of these are made by the same company, and this is their student grade, this is their more professional grade. So the Mei-Liang come in an adorable mint colored pan. So we've got like a bluish pink and we've got a mint color, pretty dang cute. And inside we have mixing surfaces. We don't have this additional mixing surface, but frankly, I never use this and I would snip these off if I could. This is a 36 half pan set for the Mei-Liang. You guys can see it's gotten some use. And instead of traditional half pans like this inner tray here on this palette, it's a really thin, flimsy plastic tray. That's my biggest complaint about the Mei-Liang pigments, is the cheap tray. And these half pans are a little bit smaller than these half pans. These are just a smidge smaller than a standard size half pan. Now you get more paint per pan in a better palette that's more readily reusable, and the price difference isn't super huge. This usually goes for around 30-ish. This goes for, I'd have to double check, I want to say 45, $39.70. Wow, that price difference really isn't that great. It's almost hard for me to say if this is actually better than this before I do another field test on the Stonehenge Aqua, because I really like the Mei-Liang, and I might be biased by how impressed and surprised I was at how they handled at the price point they go for. I almost want to say you could skip the PR half pans and do Mei-Liang pigments half pans to start, and then buy the Paul Rubens tubes. But without doing the field test, I won't go that far yet. So what about the half pans versus the tubes? What are the pros and cons? Well, the half pans have a more standard lineup of colors than the 24 tube set, so it might work better in a watercolor class setting. But there's a lot of cons that lean in favor of the tubes, and keep in mind I might be biased. The cons are that this palette is just a smidge not as good as the tubes. Although it's a bit cheaper, it's not as economical, as you can get several refills from the tubes. And the palette type included with the tube set, which is like one of those stay wet palettes, it can accommodate a variety of brush sizes, whereas half pans, it's much harder to get larger brushes in those kind of pans. It just, no matter who makes them, it's always an issue. And I do prefer the paint selection in the tube set personally, but it meshes well with the types of things I like to paint, namely flowers, pretty girls, and comics. So what's my verdict on the Paul Rubens half pans? It's not bad at all, but it's difficult to recommend them when it's sandwiched between the cheaper with more color Mei-Liang set, which is student grade, but it's a pretty dang excellent student grade, and the Paul Rubens tubins, which I just really like. So in this instance, I'd actually say it's up to your discretion. It's probably going to really boil down to how you like to paint, what kind of things you like to paint, and the color selection that you're looking for. Now, it can be kind of a challenge to get refills from Paul Rubens, just flat out. It can be a challenge to buy individual tubes. It can be a challenge to buy individual half pans. So that's one of the bigger downsides to Paul Rubens, but that is improving as time progresses, and who knows, maybe we'll start to see Paul Rubens in brick and mortar stores across the US at some point. I live in Southeast Louisiana, and while my local brick and mortar, David's Art Center does get some really great unusual stuff, and they did carry PWC way before I'd seen anybody else carrying it. I think it might be a while, just because we're in Southeast Louisiana, I think it might be a while before we see Paul Rubens on the shelves. But if you live in an area where they are selling Paul Rubens in sets and open stock, let me know down in the comments below. So we are not done yet. This set actually came with a watercolor brush, and before we move on to the watercolor compact, I want to take a few minutes to take a look at this watercolor brush. Now, I typically don't review brushes on the channel, mainly because watercolor brushes are very much a personal taste thing, and things vary really wildly, and sometimes it's hard for me to really put my finger on why I like a brush until I've been painting with it for several years. So typically, I don't like doing brush reviews, but we're just taking a look at this to see. I mean, this was included as a pack-in, kind of like a pad of Paul Rubens watercolor paper was included as a pack-in with the tube-ins. So I feel like I don't really have anything to lose. Paul Rubens carries a number of watercolor brushes, even on Amazon, with the most prevalent being a quill-style squirrel mop and a dagger striper. And they have even more on AliExpress, although it's one of those things that honestly comes and goes a whole lot. So it came in a fairly nice, oh, it actually says what it is. So this is a Paul Rubens Professional Mop Watercolor Paintbrush, size 3, wash mop rounds. It's going to be a little bit smaller than the size 6. It comes in a nice textured cardboard box. So it's a nice gift box. It would make a good gift. Ooh, that's very pretty. And inside is that is really pretty, our red squirrel mop brush, quill style. And it's in a little Ziploc bag. This is a very unusual Ziploc bag. I can't say I hate it. I don't know. I've never encountered this one before. Come on. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge because it's really pretty stiff. And I would like to start playing around with Chinese watercolor brushes more, because I've had pretty good experiences with traditional Chinese watercolor brushes and sumi brushes for watercolor as like an affordable way to get these kind of larger sizes in a natural hair brush. If this thing, when we wash out the sizing, if this thing is still good, I am going to be super impressed. So the size 6, which would be larger than this, is $20.80 on Amazon. I'm gonna have to dig a little harder to see. I thought this was going to be smaller because it was a size 3. Can you imagine how big the size 6 must be then? All right, I'm gonna go get a cup of clean water and we're gonna rinse out the sizing. All right, y'all get a juice cup. Normally, I would not dip it further than this, but I'm trying to get it on camera. You don't want to dip your watercolor brushes into water any deeper than the ferrule, because it's going to get between the ferrule and the wood and it's going to soak in and cause cracking. But I'll do it this one time to try and get it on camera for you guys, the things I do for y'all. Okay, so I'm trying to rinse out the sizing. It looks like it comes to a decent point. It looks like it's got a really nice belly to it, and I do love a good belly on a watercolor brush. And generally, just looking at it from this much, I can't see anything wrong with it, but the true proof is in the painting. For this test, I've got my brush right here. No, not too many stray hairs. That was kind of my fault. And no shedding. That's kind of impressive. I'm also going to be using the Paul Rubens set that it came with, and I'm going to be testing it out on the bow hang watercolor paper. And this is cotton rag paper. It is not necessarily like the best paper, but it's really not bad. And I've reviewed it here on the channel. If you're curious about it, it's not super common here in the US. I'd gotten it on AliExpress and decently liked what I saw. So this is a shorter handled watercolor brush, which I really like because, like I've said to you guys a bajillion times, I do watercolor comics, so this really works well for me. I'm usually like all up on whatever I'm painting. Okay, we can pull some nice fine lines. Oh yeah. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm about to get like weird about it. Yes. Yes, this brush. I like it. Might end up... See, Paul Rubens is smart. So by doing a pack-in like this, they introduced me to something that I would have blown off in the past. And now I really like it. Man, I wonder if their smaller brushes are this good. And obviously, this isn't a comprehensive test. I'm painting like a few lines. That doesn't tell anybody anything really, and I'm aware of that. I mean, really, sorry. That was not the brush's fault. I hit my mic stand. Oh, this would be so good for painting really large flower petals. It's got really good flex, and then it comes to a beautifully fine point. And I'm sure Bowie would approve of this as something to chew on, because he does love chewing on natural hairbrushes. So I'm pretty excited about this watercolor brush. You guys are probably going to start seeing it in videos, and try to remind me in like 6 months from now. I'll let you know what I think of it. So the half pan saw redemption, and I really liked the brush that came with the half pans, but now we can finally talk about what you guys voted for, what you guys wanted to see, the star of the show, the Paul Rubens watercolor compact. I purchased this Bella de Ball on AliExpress for around $23.68, which feels shockingly low. Probably I paid the original $29.33 that the newer version is going for, but they didn't have the newer version out, and the newer version is really, really cute. So before I get ahead of myself, this is available in 2 sizes, a 12 color palette that is available in pink, yellow, or blue, the 24 color new palette, which is available in pink in this beautiful teal green, and it's got a starry pattern and is super cute. And then the older palettes are available in this like colorful pink, which is just so cute, and then kind of a blue version of this minus the colorfulness, and they call it like Under the Blingy Sky, which is very, very cute. And I think my friend Allie has the 12 color set. So she's watching this. If you would like to chime in the comments below with your experiences and how you like that palette, I would love to hear from you, because it's always fun to compare experiences and compare notes. So it comes in a beautiful little cardboard box. Honestly, so much of Paul Rubens stuff is just so giftable, so well made. On the back, we have our color numbers and our color names, so that's really helpful. And it is made by Shanghai Aowen Art Materials Co. Limited. And I didn't say it, but I just want to go, aw, it comes in this, so giftable. This, that's such a tacky thing to say, but like it comes in this adorable little gift bag. My only complaint so far is I had thought that this would be coated in resin. So these very cute little pebbles, one of them just caught my finger. So if you are carrying this in your purse or your pocket, I would slip, I know it's so tacky, but I would slip this into like a little sandwich bag or something, just so it can't catch. And it looks so much like a makeup compact. It is so stinking cute. You can see my reflection in it. There is a little bit of chip paint on the back. Oh, hi. Oh, hi, y'all. It's me wearing my glasses. Hello. I didn't think I was going to be on camera quite like that, but it is very cute. It looks a lot like a makeup palette. I wish more companies would go this route, because I love pretty art supplies. I know like Jane Davenport does a lot of this stuff, but I'm not really happy with the quality of her materials. Now, this is a plastic body. It's not, it I don't know, the bottom feels like plastic, and then this feels like it might be metal. It's hard for me to tell. It might just be like metal coated plastic, and it's fairly heavy. Inside we have the same brochure that we already talked about, so I'm not going to talk about it again with y'all. We have a very cute and little swatch card. That's so precious. And then that's it. Oh, Paul Rubens. Y'all like know, like my only complaint is I wish this had resin on top so it wouldn't catch on anything and so that these wouldn't like break off. That's my complaint. And I think the starry sky looking one with the stars, that's so adorable. I think that has it. And frankly, these could just be repurposed makeup palettes. This looks like the kind of makeup palettes my mom had when I was a kid. So maybe that's what's going on, but it's very cute. Are you guys ready to see what's inside? Oh, that lid is heavy. I don't know what's going on. Oh, it's a seal of freshness. I love it. Now, this is supposed to have a mixing surface. Mine doesn't. Okay, this is the mixing surface. I will literally never use that as a mixing surface. The newer ones have like a divide down the center and you can mix in there. This one doesn't, but frankly, I don't really like mixing in the lids because it just gets messy, and I'm not all about that life, unfortunately, but I love it. This is gonna require like some peely vision. It is so makeup aesthetic, and as somebody who loves the look of makeup in terms of like the packaging and stuff, and owns some, but I never wear it, I think this is the same info as on the other swatch card, just in a different format. So I'm going to assume, because it looks like it's the same formatting, you guys can let me know if I'm wrong about that, but I'm not going to bother to Google Translate and read that. We've already done that. We don't have to do it again. Oh my gosh, I love it. It was legit sealed for freshness, and I love it. I love it. It's so pretty. Oh, I generally try not to judge art supplies by like how pretty they are. It is so pretty. It looks like it's the same colors in the 24 color palette. I could very quickly compare that, but like as I'm looking at the colors, it's let me read them for you guys. We just reviewed the 12 half pan one, so I should remember it. Permanent lemon yellow, transparent medium yellow, Indian yellow, permanent orange red, Chinese red is a different one in this one. Madder red, rose red is also a different one. Violet, I think, is a different one. I think it was permanent violet. Oh, and there is permanent violet. Cobalt blue, France ultramarine, sea blue, Prussian blue, Payne's gray, yellow green, tree green, Hooker's green, brilliant, emerald green, deep. I think it was just emerald green in the other palette. Mars yellow, which is a new one. Pozzoli red ochre, which was in the other one. Umber, which was in the other one. Burnt sienna, burned brown, and coal black. So there's a few switcheroos. It'll be interesting to compare the two palettes to each other. And I love, this is a 24 color palette, and this is tiny. This would fit in a woman's pant pocket, which is already incredibly small. It is smaller than my cell phone. 24 colors. These chiclets must be so thin, but they are so cute right now. So I guess we have learned from the half pan swatches that you don't need to pre-activate it, so I'm not going to. I was hoping I could use my new quill with this, but frankly it dwarfs this palette. Maybe I will, but it's gonna, oh, and there's like no space in between. Oh, these are in like little tiny makeup pans. I love that. Sorry, it's a very specific review. Thank you, Paul Rubens, for seeing me. I appreciate this. Oh my gosh, I love it. I've always wondered why more companies didn't just like buy empty makeup palettes and put their stuff in there. And Paul Rubens was like, hold my beer. I approve. I'm so glad that's not a mirror. I did not know I was going to be on camera tonight. I would have dressed cuter for you guys. Might have worn some makeup. So I'm going to swatch it on the tiny swatch card first. And then I'm going to do like regular swatches with it, because why not? We're going to treat this like a regular palette. Now, am I going to, because these are a lot of similar colors, I would like to assume, I could be wrong, I'm probably wrong, but I would like to assume that for the colors that are the same between these two palettes, it's the same pigments and it's the same formulation. So I don't know if I really feel the need to do color mixing and to do the wet and to wet test. I just don't know if that's necessary. But with this little cutie, I feel like we have to do an in the field test. And it's about to be spring in Louisiana, but it's still winter and it's still cold enough that that makes me rethink my life choices. So we'll see what I do with this, but I kind of feel like I got to take it somewhere because it's so little and it's so pretty. And like, this is the aesthetic I want to be seen with painting in public. Ah, geez. You know, those of you who like get it, y'all are like definitely getting it. And those of you who are like not into that at all are like, what is she going on about? So for those of you who are like, what is she going on about? I'm going to go ahead and just get to swatching. But this truly is DeBella DeBall. Factually, I want to get a second opinion. My second opinion had dental surgery the other day, and he says to ask him later when he's feeling better, so I might share that as a short. And my third opinion is a cat, and he's asleep on my chair. So I guess y'all will just have to wait for the second opinion in a short that will probably come out before this review comes out, because that's just how I roll. Anyway, I'm going to start swatching. This little palette is such a delight. It's a bit of a challenge to get the brush in there and not pollute other colors, but there are so many colors packed in here. I wonder how deep these little metal pans go. I'm imagining like eyeshadow tins, and those are only a couple of millimeters deep. Mars Yellow has some interesting granulation that would really make it nice for landscapes, but troublesome for skin tones. Fortunately, there are plenty of other neutrals in this palette for skin tones. I like Chinese quite a bit better than the Madder Red and B222 included in the 24-piece half pan set. It's a little bit strange to me that every Paul Rubens palette seems to have a slightly different color selection. I kind of love it because it gives you a chance to play with different colors and it doesn't start to feel too repetitive, but it's also a little frustrating because honestly, I didn't know going in, just based on how the listings were written, that these were different color palettes. Had I known that, I still would have purchased it. I just would have approached it a little bit differently, but I'm bringing this up to you guys because you want to really read and compare your colors carefully. They also have a different tube set. I didn't realize this at the time because they only had one on Amazon. The one I have is like the ballet set, and then they have, I think, an academic set that probably matches the 24 half pan set better. Little palette is a lot of fun. Okay, you got to be careful not to pollute other colors because they're in there really tight, but it's fun colors. I actually like the color selection a little bit better than the other 24 color palette, and there's only like 5 color swaps: transparent medium yellow, Chinese red, rose red, violet, and Mars yellow. But I think maybe violet was in the other one. I think it was permanent violet, but they almost look like the same color. But anyway, I think they're very pretty. I really like this color selection. There doesn't seem to be pigment info like with this, but there is pigment info in the brochure, so you could look it up and find out, you know, your pigment info. So at least they are providing that. So the question is, do I really want to re-swatch all 24 of these colors when the only real difference that I could find was a few different colors? Like, they handle pretty much the same. I might even like them better in this format than I like them in the other palette, which is wild. I guess I am a sucker for format, but I like the tubins better too. So maybe I'm a sucker for novelty, but I think what I'm going to do, instead of re-swatching all of these, because y'all's time is precious, my time is precious, is I'm just going to re-swatch I'm just going to swatch the newer colors just so we can see how those handle, and I'll look at the pigment info for that as well. I'm not going to do color mixing with this because it's a pretty similar palette, and I'm not going to do the wet into wet / mud test with this for the same reasons. They probably handle the same. We're going to be looking at a 152 transparent medium yellow. So that's this one here. We're going to be looking at B299 Chinese red. That's this one over here. We're going to be looking at B212, which is rose red over here. We're going to be looking at C313 violet, which is right next to it. And we're going to be looking at B200 Mars yellow. And I have pigment information for all but the Mars yellow. It just wasn't in the pamphlet. So I'm actually wrong by a couple, but these are the newer colors in this palette. Transparent medium yellow, which is PY83 and PY110. Chinese red, which is PR254, rose red, which is PV19, violet, which is PV19, and Mars yellow, which I couldn't find in the pamphlet, so unfortunately I don't have pigment information for you guys. I believe I was wrong and that violet is actually in the other set, but the other four colors are different to this little set. So pretty similar to the 24 palette. None of these colors are super lifting. The only exception would be the Mars yellow. It's a little bit more lifting and the opera red is a little bit more lifting. So of the 5 unique colors, some are more lifting than others, which is really good to see. So as excited as I am about this mini palette, and I really am excited, I was getting some bee footage while waiting for this to dry. So I decided I wanted to shut it and show it on my turntable. Well, something I noticed, there's a couple of problems. One, if you shut it while it's still wet, you're going to get paint on the lid, and it's still wet, so I'm going to get paint on the lid. Guess what I can do is I can put this back down. I mean, it's still gonna be a waste of paint. So if you are doing this for travel watercolor, make sure you let these dry before you shut them, because it is gonna end up being a waste of paint, not a paste of weight. And now this is gonna get in the way a little bit, but I noticed it doesn't shut firmly. It doesn't click shut, it doesn't magnet shut. It wants to open itself again. So it could very easily become open in your purse or bag. I always said purse, bag, or pocket. And then I thought, well, you know, most pockets are tighter than that. But if you have cargo pockets, it could get loose in your pocket. So I guess the sandwich bag recommendation, as tacky as that is probably a pretty good recommendation. I mean, you could throw some watercolor brushes in there too. Or you could rubber band it shut, or maybe you could use like a cute hairband or something. And it keeps showing me, hi y'all. But that is kind of a concern, especially because I just thought this was so cute and I liked it so much. And look how much, it's painful to see that happen. That's some paint getting wasted right there, and we don't have a lot of paint. But I did want to demonstrate that to you guys before I forgot, and I didn't want to let too much time elapse. That brings us almost to the end of our art supply redemption for the Paul Rubens half pans and our unboxing swatch for the Paul Rubens pocket palette. I'm not sure what they're calling it, but anyway, I definitely feel like the half pans were indeed redeemed. Are they as good, in my opinion, in my use case, as the tubes? You know, I like the tubes better. I think the color selection's a little bit better, and I think they're more economical. So that's a bit of a personal preference. I was super impressed, honestly, like really thrilled with this brush that they included. I look forward to playing with this some more. I would have used it with this, but it's huge compared to that. So I am really like, this is cool, and I'll probably end up trying some other Paul Rubens brushes. So way to go, Paul Rubens. You converted me. I probably would not have taken the risk otherwise. That is a smart move right there. So something I thought was interesting is all three color palettes that we've talked about today, the two bins, the half pans, and this pocket palette, all have different color selections. The tubes, I would say, almost lean in a more traditional Chinese sort of direction. The half pans, very kind of academy style watercolors, you know, a very straightforward sort of watercolor palette, like what they teach in school typically. So this could work really well for students. And then the pocket palette, I feel like, I really like the pocket palette selection. I feel like it's somewhere in between the tubes and the half pans. And some of the color choices in this really scream botanical to me in a way that this palette not so much. Honestly, it's probably the inclusion of these two, actually, this Chinese red and this rose red kind of are what makes it scream that to me. But I just like the color selection a little bit better, and I love the form factor. My only real complaint, and it's not a small complaint, is that this thing doesn't click or secure shut, and that really matters to me. I tape my beaten up Daily Driver watercolor palette shut when I have to travel with it, so that's actually pretty important. Now, I can't shut this thing until it's fully dry. We've already demonstrated that, so that's another big con for me. Whereas this, just the way this is, it kind of lifts up and protects the paint, so as long as you don't turn it upside down, you can shut your palette and carry it. I don't know why my camera decided to goof there. Still don't know why they include a cleaning cloth. You guys let me know. Maybe I'm missing out on something. If it was like a terry cloth, I could see it as being like, you know, for lifting watercolors or cleaning up messes, but that's like a computer cleaning cloth, so that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Now, before we go, I wanted to kind of revisit something that I initially kind of blew off, but it's been kind of bugging me. So these are the Etcher swatches. These are the Paul Rubens swatches, and they're not one-to-one, but there's a lot of similarities to them, enough that I kind of want to swatch them and compare them against each other. Now, with the Paul Rubens being written in Chinese, it's a lot harder for me to parse. So what I was thinking is, it might be neat to do a swatch off video as its own thing in the future. So let me know if you guys are interested in seeing me compare the Etcher watercolors against the Paul Rubens watercolors head to head. Let me know down in the comments. I really enjoyed today's Art Supply Redemption / unbox and swatch, and I really enjoyed being able to share it with you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. I don't really have a definitive opinion other than my opinion on the Paul Rubens half pans has improved quite a bit, but I still really enjoy painting with Paul Rubens, and nothing I saw today really detracted from that. I'm looking forward to doing the field test. I'm probably going to do 2 separate field tests. Ideally, I'll take this one actually out, maybe to the botanical gardens, and try painting with it in a plein air environment, because it is a small travel size palette. And I'll probably do a more standard Natto Soup Studio style field test with this on the Stonehenge Aqua using an illustration from the Laputan Living, you know, like you do, like I do. So I hope you guys will definitely keep an eye out for those. I am also going to review this Aowin palette that's actually looking, it came looking like this, okay? I have not like kicked it down the stairs or anything. I look forward to reviewing this one for you guys as well. This is one of the ones you guys said you wanted to see sooner rather than later, so I figured I would do the Paul Rubens first, and then we can do the Aowin next. So keep an eye out for that as well. Now, before I say my final goodbyes, I do want to talk about kind of an important issue that I've danced around with. So a few art supply reviewers have been sort of noticing that art supplies have gotten really hit or miss lately. I'm talking like hit or miss within the same company, hit or miss within a span of 6 to 8 months of someone else reviewing those art supplies. So what I want to say is, if your experiences with these products is drastically different than what I described today, please don't blame yourself. There may be a production issue, there may be a storage issue. Basically what I'm saying is there might be an issue with the paints that's worth investigating. I don't want to say necessarily that Paul Rubens is guilty of this, but some of the other companies have definitely been playing kind of a cup game with quality, where the quality of our product starts out really strong and then degrades over time. With the Paul Rubens, what's interesting is I reviewed their half pans a few years ago and I really didn't like them, and I purchased them again and I like them a lot better now. So I'm hoping Paul Rubens isn't one of those companies that's playing a bait and switch. But I will say that if you're a company rep listening to this for any of these companies, please know that artists we do compare notes, we do talk about our experiences with one another, and we do warn our friends and the people who watch our stuff when there's a bait and switch going on. So don't think you can fool consumers for long. Your best bet is to charge a higher price point that you can actually keep up with, instead of trying to race to the bottom for who can have the cheapest whatever, and make a consistent product that is consistently good. And reviewers, I promise, will sing your praises and you will develop a following. You don't have to do a race to the bottom and do a bait and switch where, because things are getting cheaper, you can't keep up with the quality of materials and you hope that we won't notice. We will notice. So I think comparing notes and talking about the experiences and being open about it is the best way to encourage companies to do the right thing and to be honest about their products. So if you have had a drastically different experience, if you had a really negative experience, and I haven't really seen a lot of negative reviews for Paul Rubens, so keep that in mind. But if you have had a bad experience, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to somebody else who has also reviewed Paul Rubens. Feel free to reach out to Paul Rubens themselves, but they are not great about responding back. Might be the language barrier there though. And let people know about your experiences, or record and share your own review, sharing your pros and cons for these products, because I think the more of us who talk about our experiences and speak out about them, the more we can hold art supply companies accountable and the less likely they are to play these kind of bait and switch games. So before we dive into talking about these just a little bit more, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. If you guys hear that pew 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 noise, it is people still getting their roofs repaired here in Southeast Louisiana. Ida hit in late August, early September, and it is February, and a lot of people are still having a lot of trouble getting people to come out and fix their roofs, and a lot of trouble getting insurance to pay for that. So it is still a problem. It is like a problem. It was a problem for like every house down this block, my house included. So it's just something that's going on that we're still dealing with, and it's still part of our life. Normally I like to do these intros and outros in the backyard. It is much louder back there because the house that they're fixing is much closer. So I'm doing it in the front yard. It's still pretty loud. So if it's annoying, I apologize, but it's just a fact of life right now. So I do indeed feel like the half pan palette saw some redemption today. I liked it a lot better this time than I liked it the first time. I'm not super sure what changed. Maybe I changed, maybe how I assess watercolors changed, maybe how I handle watercolors changed, maybe just, you know, years of reviewing professional grade watercolors and now almost a year of reviewing student grade watercolors, and doing a lot of those kind of reviews. Maybe that's just kind of changed how I view things and what I expect from watercolors and what qualities I consider to be valuable qualities. You know, people change and products can change, but I was pretty pleased with it. My biggest complaints are that I still like the tubes better. I still think the tubes are a better value, but it's the tube version of these. It's the same company. I still like Paul Rubens. And the color selection and this palette just was a little boring for me, but I think it's a very good sort of straightforward kind of academic watercolor palette. Like if you were taking a watercolor class, this is going to contain a lot of the colors that they would expect you to have to be able to paint along with the assignment. So there isn't anything inherently wrong with this palette. It's just, I like the color selection in the tubins better too. Now then, well, let me show you guys the swatches and stuff first, and then we'll talk about the sparkly, sparkly, wonderful thing. So here are all 24 swatches from the half pan palette, as well as our color mixing. And I think, it's like one of those no notes sort of thing. Like, it's fine. It's not like, oh my gosh, I love this so much. It's also not terrible. It didn't blow me out of the water with improvement, but it also didn't like reaffirm what I didn't like about it in the first place. So, you know, I think it's gonna make for a fine field test. And then the wet into wet test held up pretty well. No big issues, not really any noticeable optical brighteners kind of rearing their ugly heads, no harsh outlines, no chalkiness. So, you know, pretty much all good, like all things we wanted to see. But what really impressed me and kind of stole the show, for the most part, there's a couple problems, is the pocket palette. For some reason, every time I start recording outside, things get really noisy. Like they quit stapling for lunch, I guess, and now they're back at it. Just every time. It's the YouTuber's curse. So I really like this little palette. Now, this is plastic on the outside, so it's not as nice as it looks, but it's around $20-ish, and the paints inside are great. So it's kind of hard to like, I kind of wish that the outside was made of more premium materials, that this actually snaps securely. Like, it actually pops open a little bit. You can't get it to really shut, and that's definitely a problem in my opinion. If they just charged a little more money and sunk a little more money in a more premium case, that the quality reflects how beautiful it is, that would have been, you know, my major note, my major point. But the paints inside are beautiful. I love them. They are a little close together, but this is a tiny palette and there's 24 colors in there. And there are only 5 colors that I could identify that are different from the original palette. And I'm probably wrong about the violet. So Mars yellow, Chinese red, rose red, violet, and then that's not rose, that's transparent yellow medium. Transparent yellow medium, Chinese red. Doing it backwards is so hard for me. I'm sorry. I have dysgraphia, so I have to actually look at it to do it correctly. And then I'll show you guys. I'm sorry. Transparent yellow medium, opera red. I'll do this in voiceover. Mars yellow, violet, opera red, Chinese red, and then that transparent yellow. So those are the only colors that are different between the two sets. So if you're looking to not get a bunch of duplicates, you know, you're gonna pick your set accordingly. To be real, I feel like you could very easily get away with the tube set, and then if you really love the tube set, this set for travel, because there's some colors, they're not the same colors, there's a lot of color differences between those two sets as well, but they have like the same sort of vibe that they would work well for like florals and landscape and maybe portraits. Whereas the other set, the 24 half pan set, that's just more like an all-rounder set. So just kind of keep that in mind. And frankly, to me, I don't really see a big enough difference between the Paul Rubens half pans and the Mei Liang half pans to justify getting the Paul Rubens over the Mei Liang, especially if you're looking to save money and you want more colors. That said, I do think the tubes are better than the Mei Liang pigments. So there's a lot of things to consider because they have a lot of different options, and it's really gonna chalk up to what you guys like and what you guys are looking for. And there's just an outside curse, isn't there? Like it's like as soon as I go outside, the hammering starts, traffic picks up, people start delivering stuff, and the wind picks up. It's like everything happens as soon as I decide to go outside, and then when I go inside again, it quiets down. But anyway, I would be really interested in hearing what you guys liked best in today's review. Are you more of a fan of the half pans? Are you more a fan of the tubes? Or have you fallen in love with the tiny pocket sets, which are so cute, but I do wish they had resin on top. And yes, I could pour resin on top of it, but I feel like I would probably goof it and ruin the set. But you, if you are good at resin, could definitely do that. That is definitely an option. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and helping me give this palette some much needed redemption and helping me unbox and swatch this adorable little palette. I look forward to seeing you guys for the field test, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon. Bye guys!